Congress passed ANCSA in 1971, but left it up to the Alaska Natives to determine how to implement it. My dad, Richard Atuk, was one of the earliest employees of one of the Alaska Native corporations. In 2020, I interviewed him about that early work. Now, here we are, 50 years later from that work. I wanted him to come back and talk about the challenges Alaska Native corporations face today. Hi, Dad.
Hi.
So, you were there and we talked about that, about what it was like at the beginning of the ANCs. So I asked you to come back and to share with us what your thoughts are about the future. And when we did that last interview, you ended with, and there's more to say about that. So I knew at that time that you were thinking about the future and what the ANCs should look like according to you. So what are your thoughts about that now?
With regard to the corporations, overall, with regard to all of the Alaska corporations, I think they are on track. What I see is they're providing benefits to shareholders in the form of distributions, help for the young through scholarships, guidance for them, and providing forums for people in both rural Alaska and Anchorage and the bigger cities. So I think that's a really good function for them. What I see is they should stay on that track. However, I would think that they would want to have an ear towards the president on devices, ideas, plans that could help rural Alaskans in the future. So that's probably the main function, and they're doing very well. So the number one job is to keep the capital,
right,
and maintain that for continuing distributions. And they should not go overboard. I think the shareholders have a responsibility to the corporation too, to not go beyond whatever makes sense for them, whatever that might be.
So you're saying don't spend down all the way. You want to maintain a certain amount of capital within the corporations so that they continue to provide benefits and dividends into the future.
I think that is happening pretty well in my estimation. And what I'm saying is for the shareholders not to go overboard. And that's I think that's a challenge because there are so many needs.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, because I really want us to talk about how we have different pockets. We have shareholders who are in different places socioeconomically, and some shareholders might have different expectations for what the corporations should provide. But what do you think right now is the biggest challenge facing Alaska Natives? And that could be, at the state or rural, or just what is the most pressing issue in your mind for the health and well-being of Alaska Natives right now?
In response to that question, first of all, I focus on the individuals.
Okay.
And particularly young people and people taking new steps.
Okay.
And so the challenge I see is for Alaska Natives to keep their identity. I think as I look at what's going on in the world and the young people and what's going on with technology with regard to television, the news media, all of it together, there is so much going on. There is so much distraction. My major complaint is how the advertising industry would take over given the chance, so that the people need to protect their identity, their relation to their rural community, to each other, and also do that in rural Alaska, urban Alaska,
Right. I like that a lot. So what you're saying is everybody has these now.
Yes.
And if we are only looking at these and letting advertisers and media feed us what we click on, if we're not paying attention, if we're not mindful of how we use this, we're getting further and further away from our culture. Unless people at the corporations or the nonprofits are creating social media that could be accessed on these. But for the most part, people are using these to look at Instagram for style, or to follow celebrities, or to bet on sports, or I don't know what guys do.
Well, I would say I was going to mention sports. It's easy to have heroes, and it's good too, like in sports. I think what I'm saying is there must be a way to keep one ear and one foot back here to your parents, your ancestors, your elders, and not get too far away from them. So I think like life is a journey. Don't forget us. Leave us for a while and learn something. But remember to come back. And I think that's the challenge I can see is, and also it goes both ways though, that although it's interesting to stay with things that are cool and neat and there's heroes, also be aware and mindful of where your strength comes from. And the further you go back in looking at our history, what your parents did, what your grandparents did, and their ancestors to survive and make it possible for you, the young person, to be living in this wonderful state. I mean, we have opportunity to stay in relatively, well, let me say it another way, to stay close to nature, to origins, to and not get tied up into too many different things. I think that's a challenge, and I think some people will leave. That's okay. That happens to everybody, and some people find success elsewhere. That's great, but we would also be happy to have as many people come back and return to our community. I think right now, as I look at you, you're a good example of it.
Thank you.
That is really important to us people that are, now we're older, we've experienced life. We found what's really important is our relationship to people, to communities. And I'm going to harp on communities later on as we get into this.
Well, let's do that, because I think with regards to communities, are you talking about how maybe you want to start with either the dance practice, or maybe you want to start with the language project? But I had been thinking about how one led to the other. The dance group that you and Gregory Nothstein and Sophie Nothstein developed and led for 30 years so far. Naturally, by meeting on a weekly basis, you have fostered a place for urban people from mostly villages around the Seward Peninsula, Northwest Seward Peninsula, Wales, your hometown. But you've invited people from other communities who are in Anchorage to participate. We've raised generations of kids who have grown up around the dancing, and now we have community. And now you're using the closeness of that community to build the next project, which is, let's go back to our language. Is that where you're going with this?
I think I'm saying let's go back to ourselves, and language is a route and a way to get there. And I would use myself as an example to how I understand this. I was raised in the old way completely, and I'm so glad for that. so fortunate that I was able to experience the actual 8-man milk crew, and to be a part of that, and to be with elders, even though I didn't always know exactly what was going on. I have a sense of it. And that special place kind of went away. And it's something we can't really easily transfer that experience to people. But I was attracted to going to further education because we have natural curiosities, and mine was in the areas of further math and further science. A professor that was involved in the Atomic Energy Commission as a scientist spoke to our high school class,
Wow.
and that really intrigued me.
He traveled all the way to Nome?
He was at Nome.
Wow.
Yes, that's impressive. And so, you know, those kind of things stay in our mind. And what I'm saying is, so I went there and I liked the idea of science and mathematics and those kind of things. And now how it fits in with our dance group is interesting because I was raised relatively isolated from large groups, and that's okay. That's where we came from, small communities. And what I found as I proceeded in life in a different way, I still never really adjusted to it. And of course, when we do that, we have our personal problems. So many of us do have personal problems, and our transition happened so rapidly.
It really did.
I think it's understandable. And what I'm saying and what I shared yesterday with our group was that at a time we noticed there were, I called them holes in our life, spaces, vacancies, things we missed and didn't complete. And it has to do with our strength, where we came from, our history. That portion was skipped. It was replaced with Columbus history.
Right.
With the pharaohs of Egypt history.
That's
everything
right.
that didn't pertain to us and our parents.
That's right.
That's a big giant hole that we didn't know that was going on, but it happened. And so enough of us felt that when there was an opportunity, other people were having dance groups, and some of us, I think, intuitively said, you know, this could be good. and it was scary for us individually because we are a people that don't like to present ourselves to the public in a public way.
Right.
But dancing does that.
Yes.
But that's our culture. Even in the past, not everybody was a dancer.
You weren't a dancer until you were how old? I mean, you don't have to say, but it was 1991, and so far as I know, you never danced one day in your life before that.
That's correct, but I would say that that's our connection to our elders. When we moved from Wales to Nome, my mother took me by the hand as a 6-year-old, 5-year-old to watch the King Island dancers, and that stayed with us, and it harkens back to my memories as a 4-year-old in Wales. And I said when I heard them immediately, we have that. That's part of us. We own that.
You can feel it.
You can feel the drums, and it's still going on with our young people that enter our dance group today. You can see it.
I saw it on Monday. I attended the dance practice for the King Meet Dancers and Singers of Anchorage. And I go when I can, when I'm in town, and I always see, there's new people who come and stay for a while, and they feel it. They feel right at home, even if they've never been exposed to it.
That's what I'm saying, that what we do in language and everything we do also ties into genetics. And the question is, how far back does it go?
George Edwardson from Ukpiavik says 10,000 years or 13,000 years.
You know, the more I look at this, he is right, correct.
He's
in
going
so
to like
many
to
ways.
hear you say that.
Good, good. When you look at this and stay in a healthy way long enough, it starts to build on you. It continues the rest of your life. This appreciation, this curiosity, and I'm still curious to exactly who I am, because the history books left it out. And it was not only that. Things change enough. My parents had to let go of their, well, not spears, but harpoons. And my mom never left her sewing needle, but other things, and take on new. And so they were distracted too, and they had to learn how to live. So what I'm saying is there was so much disruption. And so this dancing was a way to recognize some of it. And when you progress enough, and by the way, that involves healing.
Mm-hmm.
People getting well from the trauma they faced, and especially the people that got slapped on their hands for speaking their language.
Mm-hmm.
I was so fortunate that I was on the tail end of that and didn't experience that. But I can understand. So the dance group is an introduction to new things.
Yes.
And when we were in Nome, and we had already been, I think, looking at and being involved in our translated songs. And we tied in with our aunt in Nome, and our parents and people from Wales carried that to Nome and continued translating songs.
And when you're talking about these songs now, these are not the traditional songs, these are hymns that were
translation
translated.
of church hymns. And what it does is it awakens something that is already there. The people that came into the churches and the villages called us things like heathens, and it was their idea. That's what they taught each other. But I grew up with a blind grandmother that never spoke an English word except for Zanaglusik.
How she says Santa Claus.
That's Santa Claus. Both of my grandmothers, and as much as anything, they said, "You better be good or else," in Inupiaq now. And so, yeah.
Well, I like where you went with that, and I'm going to bring it back to one thing, and I've said this publicly at the Inuit Circumpolar Conference delegates meeting. I referred to you so many times that after the end of one day, someone said, "Who is your dad?" Because I kept saying, "My dad says," and one of the things that I mentioned was, "My dad says," you said one time, "Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, that was a settlement that extinguished our land claims. That has not, they have not settled what they took away from us in terms of our culture, our language, and our history, and they still owe us that."
Mm-hmm.
So that's my lead into a question that I have for you, which is, if you are given the authority to allocate some infrastructure money from the federal government, what do you think is the most important thing that needs to be invested in, and why?
I think I have a pretty good answer for that, but I want to finish a little detail on what we were just talking about, okay. the translated songs that from my grandmother. I said she was blind, she never spoke an English word, but I received my spiritual teaching from her.
Wow. Because
she always referred, not always, but so many times, to the all-powerful Creator.
Oh, wow.
In my body and in my mind, I received that from her.
Oh, wow.
And what that means is our people, that people can call heathen and other names, had an understanding of the Creator, and that was central to their lives. So that was probably that when I talk about the vacancies or the holes we have in us, that was a big giant part of that, and I wanted to clarify and expound on that enough. Now to your question as to if I had the power and if it was unlimited, I would start with providing water and sewer lines to all the rural people. And we understand how big of an expenditure that is. However, progress is made, but first by the fact that they did it in Nome pretty long ago.
That's right. That's right.
Nome was in that shape. I think more recently they have accomplished that in Golovin, which is 100 and couple hundred people, 300, whatever it is. And I think that could go a long ways. That's where I would put it. And of course, with that many villages being that small, I think people say, oh, that they expanded out to the total cost,
Right.
And my thinking is, well, why not do it like we did in Nome? Start here. And years go by. Now we have something in Golovin. The other thing is I see, and this is maybe partly to us, is that people are living in places that erode.
Yeah, let's talk about how that affects the way you're thinking about how that affects the worldview. So much of what you've taught me or I've learned from you in studying the Kingnic dialect is it's very place-based. So there's many words that are relating to the land, and if that land is eroding, now what's happening?
A while ago I said as much as the corporations can benefit the shareholders.
Yes.
And I believe the shareholders have a role to think really hard on some of these things, because there are places that are eroding, and so many dollars are spent trying to keep what is there, because people, as good as they are, they're still people.
Right.
And selfish to themselves. We're that way.
Everybody.
That's part of us, and we can't blame them for saying, well, maybe the answer is to move, but I'm not moving.
Right.
And so I think with regard to this issue of water and sewer, I thought, and by the way, I with my training, I worked as engineer in the Army and as an engineer in real life, although I was working on forestry at the time. But I was involved in 2 septic tank systems, one in Vietnam and one in nowhere, Alaska, a place of 25 people.
Okay, I think
you see what I'm getting at?
Well, I think so. I shouldn't interrupt you, but I just want to say that I have heard the story about the your CEO said, "I want a flush toilet," and you're an engineer, and you went out and found some plans in a library, and you figured out the right angle. I don't know if I'm telling the story right, but it just makes me laugh that there was one person who wanted basically the amenities, modern amenities of a flush toilet, and you built it in the middle of nowhere.
Well, actually, it was a general, and the CEO said, here's a job, and that's how it went in the Army and in Vietnam and places. Then you had to do it. But, people are there to help, and so how do you build a flush toilet septic tank system? And the CEO, the captain, said, there's a library. And so I went to the library and got the angle needed to move.
And then you did it again in a little town where you were working for a small native corporation. Just for one house? Or for...
Well, actually, it was a model for one cabin that could be extended to others.
Okay.
later on, and unfortunately, I did the design part of it, but somebody else had other ideas and took the job away from me, and it ended up being not done properly, and I think I got the blame for it. But that's all right. That's all right. We do what we do where we are the best we can. So anyway, that's my idea of what I would do, is to take care of the sanitation.
Sanitation. Okay, here's where I want to put in my 2 cents about why it's important to invest in those villages. To me, those are home sites that are the equivalent to us as what UNESCO has designated as World Heritage Sites, right? For us, that's our heritage. We need people to be caretakers there, to choose people who choose to live there. I believe we should help them to have every right to stay there. To now we have money under several different funding bills to increase connectivity to high-speed broadband. So people who choose to stay there should have the opportunity to soon participate in online telehealth, maybe mental health, maybe their kids or they can start to take long distance education so that they can stay and become competitive, and they can participate in the e-commerce worldwide from our home site. So I would like to see, nobody asked me this question, but I'll tell you what my vision is that our villages have some steady state of population, so that those of us have moved away may be able to visit, and that will maybe have, there'll be some infrastructure there to have temporary housing to visit and to go see, because there's people now who have been raised outside who've never been to Alaska. They might be connected to St. Michael's, or they might be connected to Elam or something. I'd like to see people like that if they have the opportunity to go visit where their grandparents or their great-grandparents were born, that there's still people living there, and that they could go there and see what it's like and see where they're from.
I would expand that to a concern that I see that happens as because there is not that much going on in rural Alaska. Young people coming in to Anchorage to find their life, as it were, or to try to have something, and they get caught in the trap because there's almost nothing here for them because of, at least immediately, okay?
Mm-hmm.
People do come and become successful, and a lot of them go back to the villages.
Mm-hmm.
But for so many, is to be wary of the trap of getting lost, discouraged. We have too many people involved with drugs and other things, and alcohol, and like that. But let me tell you how this language starts to fit in. Is that first of all, I want to say that for when you talk about structure and what do you call them, transitions and all the fancy words, somebody else is doing that for us.
Right.
Our job is to talk about language and what it takes to pick it back up. And when we do that, we need to look at our history. And we go back, like I already mentioned. And I lost my train of thought here, but maybe I'll pick it back up.
Yeah, we can come back to that. So
Okay.
my thoughts were about making sure that we have home sites, traditional home sites, let's call it. I'm not trying to turn them into Disneyland, right?
Right.
But I like the idea that there might be some way for us to develop a program where descendants would be able to visit, and that there'll be people there at the Village Corporation or at the Village IRA who can welcome people, show them around. Maybe they'll have a place to stay at the multi-purpose buildings that are there or something. It's a dream of mine, just so that we have the options to always go back. I say that because under INCSA, and I know you know this better than I do, Alaska Native corporations settled for 40 million acres and they gave up 400 million acres. A lot of that land isn't ever going to be developed, but that doesn't mean that it's not worth anything. Where its value lies is in our history, and we need people there to be able to tell the history.
You know, I mean, another question you asked is related to that. And in other words, what are the? And I think I'm translating it right now to what are the strengths of Alaska Natives?
Yes.
And what I see is, I think there's applications that can be explored. And when you look at it, what happened is our people were very good with fine work, detailed work that takes a lot of patience, because that's what it took to hunt, to be successful. They had to have the best tools that they could make. They had in winter situations to have the patience to wait for hours on hours for the game to appear. And so those are some of the strengths our people have. But a big strength that they have that people are missing is, and that just comes through language, it starts to appear. A strength of the Alaska Native and rural Alaskans and indigenous people anywhere is they have the patience, they have the understanding of a community. We're not trying to promote socialism or communism like some people will call us. We're talking about real appreciation for family, for community, because the nature of a harsh environment like winter Alaska, it takes that. I thought about that the other day. How many people could go into an area and say, Welch is 5, you got to walk over here when it's 40 below. What do you do? And our people have long ago figured things like that out.
Right.
Not only with clothing, but tools, and also with community. I just want to mention that when they took our language, it didn't just take the language, it took livelihood and thinking and planning.
When they took our language, it took our livelihood and planning.
It took more than that. It took our community. It took our inter-regional village cooperation.
Yes.
And people don't even think about that. Because what happened is people were semi-nomadic. They moved with the season. They moved with what's right. And when the schools came, all of a sudden, people had to stay there.
They were fixed.
They were fixed not only for the rest of their history, but for how they interacted with other villages.
I'm so glad we got to this point, and I want to make sure that we wrap it up here, but would you please say to me what you've been saying, and you said it, I don't know if you said it at the Elders and Youth Conference recently, but somewhere I heard you say, oh, I know, you were speaking from the floor at the annual meeting for Bering Straits Native Corporation. Mm-hmm. I really appreciated that you went to the floor and you invited other communities who are from the Northwest Seward Peninsula area, Wales, Diomede, Brevig, Teller, tell me if I'm missing King Island. Mm-hmm. You said, I want to bring back trade, what do you call it? Trade fairs or trade?
Well, both trade fairs, potlatches, the communities getting together to talk about what they need.
Talk about what they need.
Between the communities.
Right.
With regard to management of land, management of game, management of people hunting, and the same thing is true today. They can meet together to tell us what they need in terms of language, what they need in terms of communication, what they need in terms of internet, on and on and on, sewer systems, what are their priorities, what, on and on, okay?
So I'm just going to point out the fact that this is right now literally the beginning of AFN, where you were there at the beginning of AFN, I believe. Isn't that where that was supposed to happen? That instead of those trade fairs, we were now going to have a big convention, and all statewide people were going to come together and organize, what do we need? And they were going to present them in the forms of resolutions. So what you're saying is not to forget that, because AFN is an establishment now. It's a institution. It's going to be here, and they do important work at a global level, at the national level, and also at the local level. I think they could do more at the local level. But what you're saying is, among ourselves, let's get together. Let's do what we used to do. Let's gather. And I remember you specifically said, no politicians are going to speak. It's just going to be us talking to each other about what we need.
Exactly.
I liked that a lot. Okay. So one of these days, 2024, 2025, we're going to set one of these up.
And what's involved is people at the local, rural level that are involved in these, or the leaders of communities. AFN encompasses indigenous people from southeast, from where we are. You see that difference?
Yeah, interior.
And I said, let me try that. And I took some steps, and people were so involved with their problems, they couldn't take the time. They got politically mixed up with each other. But this is the way things was done. This is the way things were done long ago.
I like that, and I think this is a good place for us to stop. I appreciate that you gave us this time to share where you're at, where you're thinking about who we are, what we're working towards, what remains the same, what we need to preserve. It's a lot, but it's really good.
I want to close my comment with that idea of what worked long ago.
Okay.
The Americans go back about 250 years in the United States.
Yes.
The Inupiaq go back
10,000 years?
Up to 10,000 years and more with figuring out what works. Okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dad.